try that again. In Chapter 2, we built the future value app from scratch. And in Chapter 3, what they're doing is they're saying, hey, you really shouldn't be using tables. You should be using CSS, and you should start using some of the CSS3 and HTML5 functionality that you have. If I bring this up, it's right here just so you see it. It really doesn't look all that much different when you run it, except like I mentioned, there are no tables in it anymore. They put a little border around it. They prettied it up a little bit. All right, so you can see how it works as opposed, the functionality rather is the same as it was before. All right. Now they do come in here and they mention that when you start up a new form, that's about all you have, right there. And there really isn't much more than that. Somebody had asked a question in the last class about the div and putting stuff in there. Actually, the recommendation from this author is that you just remove those div tags. And that if you're going to be putting in tags, you use the HTML5 tags. So you use the section tag and the article tag, etc. If you're not well versed with them, you really can leave the div in there and just put all the stuff within the div. Or you can remove the div. It's not really going to matter that much one way or the other. All right. So you can see that it's not like they're putting a whole heck of a lot of stuff in here. They're going to build it again incrementally. They got a title in here. They're going to be linking to a CSS file. All right. So as I mentioned to you the other day, that when they talk about what HTML is, I'm going to skip that. When they talk about what CSS is, I'm going to skip that. They do talk a little bit in here, and they talk about the fact about some CSS3 or some HTML5 stuff specifically. All right. In the book on page 81, that's where they have the actual code that's in here. So let's just quickly take a look at the stuff that's new. You'll notice that they put a header section at the top before the image, and the whole thing basically is inside of a section tag. All right, so it's right under the header, and there's the bottom of it. All right, so basically they've replaced the div tag with a section tag in here. All right. Now, one thing, this may not sound like it's important, and technically it's really not, but I want to show you something that's different from what they did than what I did. When I had you create the app, when I gave you this piece of paper, and then we created the app, and then we created it again in Chapter 2, one of the things that we did was when we created the labels, we used ASPX labels. Technically, if you're never going to put code, and if you're never going to associate code with a control, there's no reason to make it an ASP.NET control. In other words, notice they've just used regular labels here. So those are HTML labels. See that? And it would have been, it's fine what we did. All right. But, some books and some people might say, yeah, but it's kind of overkill. There was really no reason to make that an ASP.NET control. And that's actually a pretty good argument. All right. Also, you'll notice that there are a couple different CSS classes that are going to be used here. One called entry and one called validator that we're going to get to in just a couple minutes. All right. So again, the idea was they tried to pull all the stuff in there. We had a table and we had a style 1 and we had a style 2, etc. Same kind of stuff that hopefully Arinda talked to you about back in the 157 class, the separation of content from presentation. And that's what they're doing here. Other than that, most of the stuff that you see in here looks a lot like what we did before. All right, it really and truly doesn't look that different. All right. So the first thing they talk about here, and they show it on page 83, is the style sheet that they're using for the application. You can see it right here. Again, the things to concentrate on are the things that are bolded down near the bottom of the page. All right. I'm hoping that I'm right in assuming that you understand what margins are, what padding is, etc., that that's nothing new. How to set width, things like that. The fact that when you set this stuff, you can set it based on a lot of different things, and like the labels in here, for example, where this is an ASPX control because that's the one that actually holds your answer, etc. But am I right in assuming there's nothing in there that, if there is something you don't understand, please ask? All right. Notice they've used IDs for the drop-down list because there's only one of them called DTL monthly investment. They used an ID for LBL future value because there's only one of them, and one for the clear button because there's only one of them. All right. And what they did with the margin left 1 EM is they tried to pretty it up a little bit and move things around so they lined up a little bit nicer. All right. So the next couple pages here, 84 and 85, is just, these are that's some typical CSS stuff. I'm sorry, typical HTML stuff, not even HTML5. So again, I'm taking for granted that you all know that. So let's talk a little bit about, starting on the bottom of page 85, about the stuff that's specific to HTML5. All right. As it says, Visual Studio by default uses HTML5 and presents the HTML5 semantic elements to improve the structure. Does everybody get the fact that by using things like header tags, footer tags, article tags, all right, you don't have to ever do that. All right, you're doing that to try to help the browser. You're trying to set it up, as it says, to improve search engine optimization. That's the whole idea behind the semantics that they talk about with HTML5. It's not even so much that you're doing something that couldn't be done pre-HTML5, but pre-HTML5, virtually everything that you did inside of divs. And now what they're saying is, instead of having a generic tag like a div, that if you're going to you have something in your footer, you'll have a footer tag. If you're going to put something in your header, you'll have a header tag. You're able to group things together, so semantically at least, hopefully they make sense, all right, and it makes sense to the browser. All right, that's what I got out of reading the stuff that's on the bottom of page 86. And again, they show you the major tags here. And again, did you guys talk a lot about HTML5 in the class with her? Did you talk about it at all? Yeah, because that's that book that we had at the time. Again, I can't put a rub on Arinda at all that way because she didn't pick the book. Jim Schmidt did. All right, I didn't like the book. I told him I didn't think we should. Oh, no, I liked it. I used it last semester and I'm comfortable with it. That's why we used it. All right, and they didn't have a lot in there. But if you are interested, I may have told you this in another class, I don't know. But as an example, and you can go out all over the place to find this stuff, but I found out that one nice place to go to find out this stuff is html5doctor.com, because what they have there is all the elements. All right, and you can get this from W3 Schools and a lot of other places, but this is just kind of nice because they pretty much do show you the stuff, and there's stuff in here that's not just for HTML5. But if you want header, if you want footer, etc., this is a good starting place. Okay, again, you can go to W3 Schools and get a lot of the same stuff. Yeah. Okay. All right. So in your book, they try to give you a little bit, I mean, that's a one-sentence explanation. All right. The header, literally, the weird thing about headers now is it's totally possible. You can have a header any place in a document. You can have a header tag inside of a footer. You can have a footer tag inside of a header. All right, depending on how you set it up and depending on how complex your setup is, etc. Still, most of the time, you'll see a header at the top of the page. And the header is not the head tag, because the head tag, is not inside of the body. All of these tags appear inside of the body. Now, if let's say in the example that they show right here on the page, so this is page 87, let's suppose that I had the H1 tag like they show right there, San Joaquin Valley Town Hall. And let's also suppose that right underneath that H1 tag, I had an H2 tag. I don't care what it says. But I want all that to be considered part of the header. Then normally if you're going to put a bunch of different stuff in there, there's only one thing in here, but if you're going to put a bunch of stuff, then a lot of times you put an H group or a header group tag, and you surround all the stuff in there. All right. Again, kind of look at it that what you're doing is you're creating an outline for the browser, and you're going again from general to specific type of thing. Section tags, as it says, a generic section of a document that doesn't indicate the type of content. A lot of times people take their articles and they group their articles inside of section tags. All right, some people go and put sections inside of articles. There's no real magical formula to this. You can go out and take a look at a lot of HTML5 code that's out there and find people who've done it in different ways. All right, and that's because there really is no right way and no wrong way of doing it. All right. Articles, it says a composition like an article that's on a piece of paper. Most of the time when you think of articles, they're things that technically could stand on their own. So they're usually stuck inside of a section. They don't have to be, but it's an article. All right, it could be, but there's other things that you're going to see, and some of the definitions even that are in here overlap. All right. Nav, again, is typically for the navigation that you're going to have to go from page to page. That's the one that still is being overused, that people, when they put anything, anytime they put, they on their site, they want to have an unordered list, they put it in the nav. You shouldn't do that. It should be for the navigation. That's typically, again, at the top of the page, or could be on the side. All right, and a side, as it says, it's like a sidebar. All right, and if you've ever seen that, if you've ever looked at a newspaper, it doesn't matter whether it's online, whatever, but let's just say you grab the Janesville Gazette, and there's some kind of an article. A good example of this, that guy who was beheaded by ISIS, all right, the gentleman who was, the newspaper guy. Sometimes you saw in the paper, that was the main article. Then along the side, there was another article that said, Conley, or whatever his name was, has Milwaukee ties because he went to school in Marquette. That would be an aside. It's a sidebar article, so it's stuff that literally is similar tangentially, as they say, to the main article, but really in a way it could stand on its own too. All right. Figures, the idea is you're supposed to put your image inside of figure tags, because figures typically also have a fig caption tag with it that's automatically put down below the image, and it's automatically centered. And footer, again, typically legal information, copyright, trademark, whatever types of information. All right, but as always, there are exceptions to all this stuff. Yeah. The question was, do these all have the same default margin? The answer is they're supposed to. The actual answer is no, that it's still somewhat browser specific. So quite often what you end up doing, and you can look this up on your own, but a lot of times people literally come in there and they call a CSS reset at the beginning of their CSS file, and they stick every tag that you can think of on there. They set margin to no, they set to 0, padding to 0, etc. Yes. Yeah. All right. The author, it says in here, and again, this is the author speaking, so you may or may not agree, and not all authors, not all books agree. All right. It says, now that HTML5 is available, div elements shouldn't be used to structure a document. Guess what? They still are. People still use divs even inside of sections and asides and whatever. I think part of it is just familiarity. People are used to doing things in a certain way. But the idea is really that these HTML5 tags that we just looked at should be replacing div tags. That's the idea. All right. It might be a while before that happens. All right. Similarly, the author says near the bottom of the page here, span tags have historically been used to identify portions of text that can be formatted by CSS. This is my take on it. I typically equate div tags with block elements. You know, H1 tags, paragraphs, etc. And you typically equate span tags with inline elements. All right? So, but again, not every book is going to agree with every single thing that's said in here. All right? And again, as we just mentioned, you can still use div tags, you can still use span tags. Probably, I'm not sure, but you know, if they really want to go all out, if Microsoft wants you to really use HTML5 tags, maybe in Visual Studio 2014, maybe they'll remove that div. I don't know. All right. Then on the next page, you know, this is what CSS is. And they tell how you can use it, etc. There's how to code basic selectors. There's nothing new in there that you haven't already had. Now, you know, I've heard some of the comments, and I've asked, but some of the stuff that you guys have said about, you know, what you did or didn't get in that class. But let's face it, I think Arinda would even admit to you that with a lot of it, it was show you the generalities of how this stuff works, show you a book that's got examples, show you the W3C site that's got examples, and kind of turn you loose. So I think whether you had help from her, or whether you did it a lot on your own, or via the net, you know, the web, it doesn't matter that you learned some CSS. You learned basic CSS. I believe everyone in here has. All right. So again, I don't think there's anything in here that you don't already know. That's the same stuff that we looked at earlier. You know what a rule set is. You know what a selector is. All right. So again, the rule set, as it says, it's a selector and one or more rules. So what's the selector? It's what comes before the curly. All right. What are the rules? What are inside the curlies? All right. And you can nest this. You can make this as complex as you want. All right. What was that? Yesterday, John had to bail me out because, and don't ask me why, it just too much stuff in my head. Not good stuff, but too much stuff in my head. I wrote yesterday color, and I think I had hyphen red instead of colon red. All right. As soon as we changed it from hyphen to colon, it worked. All right. Cross-browser compatibility. In English, what the author says there is you should test your app on as many browsers as possible, including, at a minimum, these. All right. Now, again, that's a little old, but those were the releases of those browsers when the book was published. All right. And as he says, if you want the website, the website for ratings and stuff, you can go out here. I'm not going to do that right now. All right. And when you are talking, there's one thing in here to talk about cross-browser compatibility. And I think everybody understands that. But the other thing to realize is not only is it cross-browser compatibility you should be talking about, but it's accessibility that you should be talking about. Maybe not for the sites and the stuff that we're building in here because it's pretty simplistic. But if you were building an actual ASPX site for people, all right, you'd want to make sure that it was accessible so as many people could use it as possible. Did you guys talk last semester about the JavaScript shift? Does that ring any bells? Okay. Because basically what that shiv is, as it says it lets older browsers know about elements. Well, bottom line is, in English, what it does is it says if your browser that you're using is able to support the code you're putting in, then do it. If it's not able to support it, let it degrade gracefully. So in other words, if you use things like border radius, where you want to make a rounded effect on your buttons, and the browser you're using doesn't support border radius, it just shows it as a regular button. But what you're saying is don't break it, all right? And it was called a shift because somebody wrote that. You can look it up again if you're interested in it. So, as it says, the rule set that sets the 8 semantic block or elements to block elements, yeah, you could do a display block, but again, you could come in there and you could run a reset. Now, again, I know we talked about this before, but if I just say CSS reset, all right. How do I do that? There. That's, you may or may not have heard this, but Meyer Web, that's Eric Meyer. He's one of the, quote, godfathers, unquote, of CSS. He's done a lot of work on it. He's put out a lot of books. But this is his. So, going back to what you talked about before, you're taking almost every kind of tag there is, and what are you doing? Making sure it has no margin, no padding, no border, etc. For the same reason that Zane mentioned before, what you're trying to do there is you're trying to start with a level playing field. And you're trying to make sure that regardless of the browser that you're using, all right, you're basically turning off all of the defaults. All right. Now, we kind of went over this quickly last time, so I do want to talk about it. It's just a couple pages here, 98 and 99. It talks about Visual Studio features for working with HTML. All right. They talk about snippets in here, and they talk about Smart Indent. And it's shown here on page 99. Remember, you all know you've got IntelliSense. All right. So what they're saying here, and again, I don't use it, so I'm just going to just quickly walk over the stuff that's in here with you. I guess they did show it they explained it on the last page. All right. It says, for example, the first example shows the snippet for the link element. So it says if you type in an L and you press the tab key twice, it'll give you a template of code for a link element. All right. I don't like it because somebody else is writing code for me, and then it's probably not in the order in which I'm used to putting things, etc. So I don't use it. But when you're first learning things, the nice thing about snippets is that's what they're for. All right. The smart indent, as it says right there for the second example, if you press the enter key when the insertion point is in a content area of an element, the ending tag is dropped down 2 lines. So, in other words, if you're in here, all right, if you remember when I was trying to pretty stuff up, okay, I was just hitting the enter key. So what they're saying is you can use smart indent to do the same thing. All right, so again, so when the insertion point is in the content area, all right, if you press the enter key when the insertion point is there, it's supposed to move it down for you. Does it always work? Again, that didn't work. All right, I don't see anything that did that was different. Right. Okay, so it's doing a minimal amount of formatting. All right. I tend to like to just put my tag up there on a line by itself. Maybe I didn't do it like that last time, but then line stuff up like this. I think, and you may or may not agree with this, but I think that when you do that, all right, and you start lining stuff up, it makes it easier to read. All right. Pretty soon, before you realize it, with some of these things, you've got tons of attributes, and like this, and it is real hard to read. That's why I've done it like this. I think I tabbed it over a couple times before, but I think that's about as easy to read as possible. Yeah, well, and I'll take your question in a second. What you're saying there is if John or Mike knows that there's 4 things that you should have in here, looking at it this way, you can tell there's only 3 of them in there. That's what's nice. And you're not constantly going back and forth and moving your way along the screen like you are down here for this stuff, where you got, yep, there it is type of thing. And it's going to take a little more time to do that, but I think it's worth it. Maybe not in these first couple programs, but as programs get more sophisticated, it's a lot worth it. You know, with one of the first-year students, I was helping him the other day, and I saw, you know, he said, I have some experience in this. Well, yeah, but he you know, literally he was butting his CSS stuff up together, putting multiple things on the same line, no indentation, etc. All right, and you know, as they say, you know, if you learn a habit early, then it becomes a habit, and you start doing it the right way, or at least hopefully you're going to do it the right way. Yeah. Yes, they are. Yeah. Well, and going along with that, yeah. Yes. That's correct. And then in that case, it almost looks like jQuery, the minified jQuery. You're right. And you can run, there are CSS minifiers. You can run minifiers on almost anything. And the reason you minify it, it's like zipping a file because it's smaller, so it loads faster. All right. So yeah, but that, there's Blackhawks. My guess is this hasn't been minified at all. It just looks that bad. All right. But again, going along with that, I've said this before, and this has surprised a couple people. No one from Blackhawk wrote this. They contracted this out to some firm in Minnesota. All right. And supposedly they're in the middle of a rewrite right now because you've all heard about the portal, yes? When the portal comes to be, etc., this is all going to be fixed. And when you get to that point, you're not going to be able to go down to the bottom of the screen and see 800 hyperlinks. All right, that's supposedly all that stuff is going to happen. Plus, you'll be able to customize your own page. To me, when I come up with my own page, I could care less about this, even though it's the program I teach it, even though it's got the wrong name. I'd like to be able to customize my home page and put links, icons, or whatever to the stuff I use most often. And that's all I want on there. And that's, when I looked at the portal stuff, I was involved in that last spring, that's what it is. All right? And, you know, again, supposedly when that all comes to be, that'll make it life a lot nicer. We'll see. They talked about it going live in October. That's what I'd heard. Now, again, that might have changed, I was in a bunch of meetings. I got invited. Another couple, they said, well, if you're free, just stop by. But they said, what do you like and what don't you like? I think after the first meeting, when I told them what I didn't like, that's why they probably weren't asking me back again. I wasn't being mean, but I said, I'm going to be critical here. You know, and I said, you've got this on the front page. And they were like, yeah. I said, I can't think of as an instructor why I'd ever use that. I might like a quick link to a school calendar, but I don't want that taking up my space on my page all the time. You can put it in there as a hyperlink, that's fine. Then I'll use it as I need it. Oh yeah, and like that wasn't that smart of a thing to say. But it was another one of those examples when a couple people, they were like, boy, I never thought, well. All right. As it says, the IntelliSense even does do some build-in with the people with disabilities. All right, and we're not supposed to call it that, people who are challenged in any way. All right. And that actually brings us up, not to the end of the chapter, but it brings us up to the stuff, more or less, that's new in the chapter. All right, starting on 102. Okay, Visual Studio features for working with CSS. So let's go back to here and take a look at some of the stuff that's there. All right, so I want to bring the page back up again. All right. So again, I'm on page 102. And the author says that the figure that's shown on page 103 starts by showing how to create an external style sheet that's added to the project folder. Well, bottom line is, and this shouldn't surprise you, you can right mouse click on here, you can choose add, you can choose add new item, and one of the things that's in here someplace is a style sheet. All right, which again will be called style sheet, or you can change it to whatever you want. All right. I also mentioned to you last time that, for instance, if I didn't have the link to my style sheet, I do, but if I didn't have it, I can literally grab that style sheet from here and drag it out, and it does the same thing. All right, that's just a couple things. No, I don't want to do that anyway. All right, so they talk about that. All right, it says to enter and edit rule sets, first open up the editor window and go in, and what they're going to do for the last part of the chapter, the last 8 or 10 pages, is they show you some of the features that are unique to Visual Studio for working with style sheets. And we'll go over them. I'm not going to lie to you if you go, wow, you don't seem to use those, know those very well. It's because I don't use them. I'm just used to using style sheets the way I use style sheets, period. But there are some things that are built in specially for Visual Studio, so we'll take a look at them in just a minute. All right. It says there, if you want a summary of the selectors for the rule sets you've created, you can open up the CSS outline window as shown in the figure. All right, and that's what they're showing there. So if you want to open up the outline window, as they show on the middle, near the bottom of page 103, it's View, and you go down to Other Windows. All right, and Other Windows, you choose you use the Document Outline command to open the window. So there it is. All right, and there's other things. So you see them. It's kind of a fast way where you can jump around and look at stuff that's in there. So this really isn't CSS, but if I want to jump right to the body, boom. See that? Now, if that helps you, go ahead and do it. And I suppose if you've got a .aspx file that's that big or that's that intricate, where you've got to jump to a certain place in there, you can. And then if you don't want it anymore, you can close it, or if you do want it, all right, you can hide it and bring it up on an as-needed type of basis. All right. So that's what's mentioned again on pages 102 and 103. All right. Page 104 says to simplify the task of creating styles, you can use the new style dialog box that's shown in figure 314. All right. So it says from design view, which is what we're in right now, open the new style dialog box by choosing Format and New Style. I'll close that, I think. I'm just going to bring my toolbox up. I'll close that. Okay. Design is where I should have been, not in the source mode. All right. So there's Format right there. And again, what's the first thing underneath there? New Style. All right. So what I can do is I can highlight an element and I can do any of this stuff from here. Does that make sense when you look at it here? All right. So I can come in here and literally define a new class right here if I want to. So I can define a new class, and I can set up the font, I can set up the background, I can set up borders, I can do the box stuff, meaning padding and margin, I can do relative position, work with z-indexes, work with absolute position, do some general layout types of things. This is another way you can do it. Some people like this because you can set a bunch of different things at once, and you can just jump back and forth before them. And just to show you, I'll take your question in a second, but if I go to New Style, keep it there, define in the current page, all right? So if I'm just going to come in here and just grab a bunch of stuff, okay? Underline, line through, font size, we'll set it to small, font family, we'll set it to Arial, etc. I'm just grabbing a few things, not that it's big. Put a little bit of bolding in it. The style, we'll just keep it normal, all right? The variant, we'll use small caps. The text transform, capitalize. The color, I'll just pick a color, all right? Kind of ugly, but you see it all. And I don't want line through because that's way too ugly. So I'm going to click apply, all right? So what did that do? Well, you can't really see it from here, but again, if I go back into my styles, I just put a new rule in there someplace, and it's got all that stuff in there. Does that make sense? I don't use that because I find that confusing. All right, when I have to keep going back, one of two things is happening. Either I'm not using it enough, which is very well may be the case, or I don't like it. But if I don't like it, I won't be using it. All right. So it's another thing that you can use to set stuff up, but you don't have to. Go ahead. I thought that I did, but it didn't look as though it did. No. All right. Yeah, it has to save it someplace, but if we go back and we look in here, all right, I don't see it in here, so let me try to do it. I didn't save. So let's save style.css. All right, and I don't know if it put it in here or not. I'm looking for it. I don't see it. Because it was called like whatever the default name was. All right, so let's look and see if we see it in here. All I see there is styles. So let's go back. Let's go back again to where we just were. All right, and it looks almost as though it's still. Yeah, we can do that too. All right, but I thought that it would have been up in here. But you're right, we can do that too. So we can go back. Yep, you're right. Stuck it in there. Thank you. Existing style sheet would be the one. And if we did that, okay, notice by default it doesn't give you a name because you might have multiple ones. The drop down has it in there. The drop down would have multiple ones in there. So yeah, you're right. Since I didn't choose that, thank you, John, as always. But it just threw it in here. All right. Now, again, what did we do? We just defined a new class, right? We called it new style. There's nothing at all stopping you from, after you've done that, to highlight all that and then throw it into the style sheet. All right. So if you did it one way, you could still put it back. All right. But the other thing is, right now, this isn't going to do a dang thing because we haven't put the class in there in any element. But that's just to show you that that is a thing that you can use. All right. Again, I think with much of it, like I said, what's happening? To me, they, meaning Microsoft, is coming in and trying to make it easier for you to use. Anytime you say something like that and you say, well, it's making it easier to use, and I'm not being funny here, easier is a relative term, right? Because it might be easier for me and it might be a lot harder for you. But if somebody doesn't have a great knowledge of CSS, so they're going through this book and they're a programmer, but they don't know much CSS, this is a way to more automate what you're working with and put stuff in. This is one of the ways that you can use that. All right. You can also go in, you can modify styles also after you've done that. So you can right click a style as it says in the editor and choose modify style, and you can do that too. All right. Then turning up to page 106, all right, on 106 they say how to use the apply styles editor. So it says the chapter ends by showing you 3 windows that are designed for working with styles. Each of these can be useful in some circumstances. So the first one they show on 106 and 107 is the apply styles window. All right. So as it says that it doesn't matter. It says in any of the designer views. All right. If we go into view, all right. So it's just view and apply styles. There it is. So what is that showing you? That shows you the styles that you currently have set up, right? So I can click on it, I can click the down arrow, and I can go to the code, I can do all sorts of different stuff. All right. It's a way that you can come in and do some work with existing styles. That's all. All right. And again, what you see on the screen here after I invoked it, all the stuff that you see right here, everything, is the same picture that you see in your book on page 107. It's a way of moving styles around and combining things, etc. So it's just another one of those tools that are in there. Again, if you want more than I just gave you, which was just a little bit, just take a look on page 107 because they go through an example much better than I just did. Then there's the CSS properties window. All right, so I'm going to remove that. And now we come in here, we choose view, and we go down to CSS properties. Now, what is that? It's a properties window. You know what the properties window is already. But the properties window that we've used in both the 142 class last semester or when you had it back in VB time or whatever, is now it's a properties window, but it's just for CSS. So if I wanted to come in here and change things, right there, I could do it. So it's another example of something that you can use. All right? And you notice, what do we have? It's the H1 tag, so you notice the color. And as always, you'll notice if I come in here and change it, you see it's immediately been changed. All right? Nothing new, but some people like to use that. They're so used to using the properties window for controls. Now that they're saying here is, well, basically you also have one if you want. You also have one for your CSS. All right. So again, there's a section in the middle of page 109 that goes over how to use that. All right. Then finally on page 110, there's a Manage Styles window. So this is under View, and you go down to Manage Styles. If you look up here, you notice that they're all together. All right. So if we go to Manage Styles, again, it's going to do just that. It looks very similar to what we looked at before when we did, what was that one? That was the Create a New Style window. It looks a lot, in some ways, the same. All right? But you can come in here and notice when I hover over it, I don't even have to click on it. I can hover over it and it'll show me all the stuff that's set. So you can move a style from one style to another, so I can come in here and I can click on it, I can drag stuff back and forth, etc. Again, I don't use it much, I'm not going to lie to you. So if you look on the middle of page 111, that's where the author gives you a little bit of stuff, so to speak, about that. All right? And that's actually it for chapter 3. Now, what I'm going to do, we're going to take a break early today, but when we come back from the break, instead of going into chapter 4, because we're not going to finish that, that's going to take a whole period. We're going to go through chapter 5. So I'm going to skip the order for now. And chapter 5 is a short chapter, and there's just a couple things I want to cover in it. So my hope is next Tuesday we'll go through as much of chapter 4 as possible. Best case scenario, we finish the entire chapter in a period. Worst case scenario, we need that period and half of the next period. But that's the worst case. So a week from today, when you come in here, and I'll try to do it earlier if I can, but a week from today, I'll have your first assignment for this class. So the following week, the week of September 8th, so the 9th and the 11th, that Tuesday and that Thursday will be lab for both days. All right? And we will end up I'll probably just have the formally assigned day for that to be that Tuesday, which is the 9th, so it'll be due the 23rd. What I don't want to do, what I'm trying to do here, and you have to help me, okay, is when I assign something, if you say, well, yeah, we already have something due that day, then let me know. Then I'll try to move it out by a couple days. All right, because I don't want it where, oh my God, now I just spent all night working on this, and oh, that one's due tomorrow too, type of an idea. All right, so I'm trying to stagger the due dates on this stuff as best I can. All right, so let's take a break. Let's just come back at 11, and when we come back, we're going to go through Chapter 5, which should not take the rest of the period. I mainly want to just talk about tracing with you in Chapter 5. All right, so that's it for this chapter.